Hi, I'm Trevor.
And I'm Liz.
And today we're going to talk about the game of kings, chess. Chess is a strategy board game where two players control opposing forces, each with identical units, and attempt to capture the opponent's king. In order to do this, you move your pieces into position and capture the opponent's pieces in the process. The way a capture works is if you have a piece and your opponent has a piece and there is a legal move that would place you in that piece's square, then since you cannot occupy the same space at the same time, you take the opponent's piece. Every piece, however, has different rules for how it moves and how they capture. We'll go ahead and go over the pieces, starting with the pawn. The pawn is the most basic piece, and there are 8 of them that start in your front row. You have 2 rows of pieces at the beginning, and they're the rows of squares closest to you. And there are 8 pawns in the front row. A pawn, on its first turn, may move 1 space forward, or it may move 2 spaces forward. On any turn besides its first move, it can move only 1 space forward.
Or if a pawn wants to capture, it can capture diagonally.
This is the only way a pawn can capture, so if 2 pawns are right in front of each other, neither one of them can move until they are given an opportunity to capture.
Alright, the next piece is the rook. There's a rook on either side of the board for each player, so you've got 2 of them. The rook can move in a straight line either forwards or horizontally to the side, and that's also how it captures.
So if it's
Yes.
right there, there we go.
Then I can capture all the way down here.
The next piece is the horsey, traditionally called the knight. Actually called the knight by everyone except me. The knight has very unique movement rules because it moves in an L shape. 2 spaces forward and then 1 space to the side. And as long as it adheres to the 2-1 rule, it can pretty much move anywhere within that little template that it sees fit. The knight is also unique in that it is the only piece that can jump over other pieces. So, if, for example, you have a wall of pawns here guarding the queen that the knight wants to capture, the knight can simply jump over them and bop that queen out of the game.
Alright, the next piece is the bishop. The bishops are on either side of your king and queen. One of them's on a black space, the other one's on the red space. They can only move in diagonals, so this bishop can only move on red spaces in any direction in any number of spaces. This one can only move on black spaces, any direction, any number of spaces. It cannot jump over pieces, it has to go straight. And that's also how it captures. So if there was a pawn out here and it was over here, it could capture all the way down to this pawn.
And the next piece is the queen. The queen, there's only one of them, and it is right next to the king. When the board is set up, a quick rule of thumb for making sure you've got them on the right side is that the queen always starts on her own color square. So to the right of the king rather than to the left. The queen moves either can move any number of spaces in either the up, down, left, right directions or any of the diagonals. So basically, the queen combines the movement rules for the rook and bishop, and captures the same way. So in this example, the queen could capture either this rook or this knight from where she sits. The one thing that the queen can't do is copy any of the elements of the knight's move, so the queen doesn't have an L-shaped move, and she does not have the ability to jump over other units.
So the king is the last piece. It's your most important piece, yet it's also one of the weakest pieces. If it was here, it could only move one space in any direction. So it can move here, or here, or here, or here, or any of these other spaces. It has pretty limited movement and can only capture that one space.
So those are the basic rules of how units, what each unit does. There are also a few special rules of chess. Most of which relate to the king. One of them is castling. If, for example, in the middle of gameplay, you end up in a situation like this, where your king has not moved and your rook has not moved, you may do what is called castling, which is where you move the king here and the rook here, which is a defensive move that lets you basically put the king in a better defensive position. There are also a few special rules regarding check. Do you want to talk about how check works?
Yeah. So, if your king is in check, it means that it can be captured by another piece on its next turn unless it moves. So like in this situation, well, this would actually be checkmate.
Let's move that
Yeah.
out. Actually, that's not a good one. Let's move that one out of the way.
Okay. So right here, in this situation where the knight's out here and the king's right here, it's in check because on the knight's next move, it could take the king. So if you're in check, you have to move your king out of
you don't
danger.
you have to move so that your king is out of check. In this example, you can move your king, or you can have one of these pawns take the knight. Any move is a legal move as long as it gets your king out of check.
And then, like the other situation we had, where this pawn was right here, it would be in checkmate, and at this point, the king can't move anywhere. Well, I guess it's not in checkmate because pawn can take the knight. Yeah. I don't know. Can you come up with an example of checkmate?
Sure. One of the most often seen forms of checkmate is when the board has ended up such that the king is in a corner and you've got a rook here and a rook here. And we'll go ahead and move these out of the way too. The king is threatened by the rook, but he has nowhere to go because any square he goes to will be threatened by another rook. When a player's king is put into checkmate, they lose. There is also a few more rules about the king regarding check. One of which is that the king cannot move into check. This is because if he did, on the next turn he would lose, or his king could be taken. So the king could not move here because he would be in check. The castle move I mentioned earlier also does not function if doing so would put the king in check. So if we had the rook here threatening this square, I couldn't do this because my king would be in check. But even if the rook were here, I couldn't do this because the king would have to move through check. And I think as far as basic rules of chess, that's...
One more. If you have a pawn and it happens to make it the whole way across the board to the last space of their opponent's side, it can get promoted to any piece it wants to be. A lot of people decide to make it a queen, so it has a lot of flexibility in where it can move, or it can be turned into a knight, where you can move into L shape. And sometimes players choose to replace the pawn with an already captured piece, and I guess if there hasn't been a piece captured, then they just remember.
One of the more common ways, if you want a queen but your queen hasn't been taken, I've seen a lot of people take a rook and turn it upside down. And is there anything else?
That's all.
All right, well, that's all for the game of chess. So once again, I'm Trevor. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.